The path to mastery leads through the heart of adversity. Challenge is the raw material from which courage and strength are forged. Warriors are not defined by events. Warriors define them. Warriors conquer themselves before all else. Warriors are relentless in their service to others. Join us as we open our hearts and hone our minds to a razor's edge. It doesn't matter how slow you go, only that you do not stop. Your time is now. And now your host, Jason McKenzie.
Oh, how I love masterclasses, and oh, how I love masterclasses on subjects that I'm super interested in. And I think you guys are going to love this one today too. So what I did was, I talk a lot about emotional validation. It's obviously a super important skill. I think it's a superpower. And the best part about it is it's something that everybody can learn, right? So just takes the knowledge, and it takes the implementation, and it takes the recognition that fucking learning any new skill takes time, and especially doing it under, say, emotionally heightened situations can be really challenging, right? But it is when you practice it, and it is amazing. And you're gonna hear it, you're gonna practice it, you're gonna screw it up, it's gonna work. You're gonna screw it up, it'll work, and on and on and on and on, and eventually you'll learn. And you will get better like any other skill. And soon you will be at a place where maybe not that you'll ever be perfect at it. I don't know if anybody really is, but you will learn how to truly acknowledge, understand, and appreciate somebody else's emotional experience. And that's really what emotional validation is. I don't want to spoil the whole masterclass. And the idea of a masterclass is really getting a couple people together, who are knowledgeable on a subject and teaching something. Masterclass just sounds really fancy and smart. And in this one, what I did was I partnered with my buddy Ed Van Hooydonk, who actually taught me emotional validation. And him and I paired up. He's done this a lot in his personal life, but he's taught it to hundreds of people over the past number of years in some of the work he's done in facilitating peer support groups, and also training people to facilitate those peer support groups. And so him and I partnered up, and we got together and we put on a masterclass. Now, what I will say is the reason I did this was I wanted to raise money. So I'm doing a bike ride, and while I'm riding my unicycle, one-wheel unicycle, 80 kilometers a day. So like 50, what would that be? That would be like 50 miles, about 50 miles, like 2 days in a row. So 50 miles one day, 50 miles the next, to raise money for multiple sclerosis. It's a huge thing called the MS bike ride that happens every year. And I've always wanted to do it on a unicycle. So what I thought was, well, what better way to raise money then I'll put on a masterclass, like a 90-minute webinar, and I'll invite people to attend. And if they want to attend, just make a donation. It doesn't matter how much, whatever feels good to you. And then you can join us on the call. And it was amazing. I raised like $1,050, I think. Like, how freaking awesome is that? Not only do I get to talk about what I love, a subject I love, and get to teach people this important skill that they can take in their own lives, use it, apply it, and then, teach it to other people, but we get to raise money for a great charity. Like, it's a total win-win situation that I'm really, really happy that we pulled off. So I would offer the same thing to you. I'm going to release this as a podcast, but if you get value out of it and would like to contribute to my ridiculous, really, really long unicycle ride, I would be extremely grateful for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post in the show notes page, and I'm sure I'll post this on Facebook and stuff, and I'll post a link to donate. And if you'd be willing to do that, I'd be truly grateful. You'd help a great cause. And so listen, guys, you're going to hear, so masterclass, you're going to hear this. Maybe the audio quality might not be like typically podcast quality because I used a different platform, but you're going to get to hear people asking questions and interacting in a way where they're getting the answers that feel good to them. So, maybe not feel good to them, but asking questions, it's interactive. Let's put it that way. So there was probably about 20 something people on the call, I think, overall. And so there's some great questions. There's some great dialogue. And I think that's always really helpful, right? Because it helps, people asking questions and answering them and having a conversation is a really good way to put some extra context around it and will help you get more value out of the content. So with that being said, enjoy this masterclass and seriously, apply these skills, man. This is game-changing stuff.
Perfect. So, welcome, guys, to our masterclass on emotional validation, the most important relationship skill you were never taught. So, just for some context here, so there's some of the guys from our mastermind group on here. This is a big focus. So someone's going to send me a chat. I'm really probably not going to answer it right now. So I see it's flashing. So just be forewarned. For some of the guys in our mastermind groups, this is a skill we teach. It's quite a foundational piece of our masterminds, and the reason is because, in my opinion, it is the most important skill out there available for fostering human connection. It really is an incredibly powerful skill to develop. So that's why we focus on it. And what's great about it is that, or interesting, is up until just a few years ago, up until like literally 6-7 months ago, I had never heard of it. So what we're going to cover tonight is some really foundational concepts that are important in order to be able to effectively validate. We're going to talk about a new look at, maybe a little bit of a different look at human emotion than maybe what you've thought about before. Maybe you haven't thought about it at all. We're going to talk about emotional validation. We're going to talk about some real life examples, and then we're going to do a Q&A. So before we get into it, I wanted to introduce myself. I mean, everybody on the call knows me, but Jason McKenzie, in my day job, I am a technology leader, but what I'm truly passionate about, I am a mastermind facilitator, coach, author, speaker, yada, yada, yada. And my partner in crime here is Mr. Ed Van Hooydonk, and he is also a masterminder. However, he is the person who, in a training program last year that he was part of putting on, introduced me to the concept of validation, which I said I had never heard of prior to that. So, my mom is on. Everybody wave at my mom. Hi, Brenda. Can you hear us?
I can.
Okay, awesome. My mom is the person responsible for me. Okay.
I can't see it. You can't see it though.
Okay, let's just mute my mom. Okay, no, I'm just kidding. So Ed is the person who introduced me to emotional validation. So Ed, you want to take a minute and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Jason. Great to meet everyone tonight. And what a special treat to meet Jason's mom as well. This is awesome. So my name is Ed Van Hooydonk. And in my day job, I'm a sales executive with a company that provides fundraising software to nonprofits. And in fact, the software that Jason is using for his fundraiser for the ride was designed by my company. After hours, when I'm not doing family things, I volunteer for an organization called Sash Bear, and we teach a family connections program. And that's where Jason and I met back in the fall when we talked about a lot of things around, being effective in relationships with our loved ones. And validation was a key skill that I know was a game changer for him, as it was for me and for my family when we got introduced to it about 2 years ago, actually. And really excited to be here tonight in support of what Jason is doing to, help these skills perpetuate out in the world. So welcome and thanks for having me along.
Yeah, thanks for doing this, Ed. And and I wanted to tell you guys that we actually we've raised hit over $1,000 just as a result of doing this webinar. So thank you to everybody that contributed, and I really appreciate it. And I'll think of you when I'm suffering like hell on that ride. So I wanted to start by just getting a few people a few courageous people perhaps to chime in and just let the group know why it is important for you to be here tonight, because I think that will help set some context. So we'll just do maybe 1, 2, 3 people who are willing to share. So somebody have the courage to go first. Rashad.
Myself, Rashad. I can go first. Yeah, I can go first. I learned about this tool, this practice through our mastermind that I'm currently in, headed by Jason. And I'm just seeing the things that it's doing in my life. Like my girlfriend is always commenting on the way I respond to her now, and my kids as well. So I'm just seeing the value in it. And honestly didn't realize how bad I was at this as far as knowing what to do and not validating feelings. Like I just was always like, even with my kids, like when they're crying, stop crying. Why are you crying? I was one of those guys who just immediately went to that. So I'm here just to really learn more about this and how I can apply it to my life. That's my goal. Because I see the little bit that I have learned in the last couple of months, the wonders that it's done for me, and I'm just happy to see what it's done for me, and and improving the skill.
He's just asked a few people.
Hold on, I'm going to mute my mom. Hold on. Thanks, Rashad, man. It's great to have you here, brother.
Yep.
All right, and Javier, you want to go?
Yeah, so, hey, there's my wife right there. So to me, it's important because I haven't gotten to the point where Rashad's at right now. To me, it's kind of difficult, It's just something that I'm trying to learn, and I think something that my wife's trying to learn too, and we could really benefit from it. Jason knows that I struggle with it a lot because for a while I thought it was condoning bad or what I thought was crazy. So, I'm taking baby steps. We both are, and we're getting better at it. But I just still I need more exposure to it. I'm hard headed. I need to be exposed to it more until I can finally get better at it. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, brother. We'll go for one more. Does anybody else want to chime in? Just unmute yourself if you do and chime in.
Hey guys, I'm Jeremy. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
I don't know what the question was, but I kind of figured it out by the responses. But yeah, I need to incorporate validation big time in my life, and I think it's going to benefit me in a lot of areas. And so I'm in a mastermind as well, Tuesday nights, and I catch myself trying to do it now, trying to validate my wife. And I think more yet, I need to start validating myself too. So I don't know, I'm real interested in this call, and I think it's going to benefit all of us, really.
Awesome, man. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much. And all right, let's get rolling, guys. So the first thing we're going to do, as I said, we're going to cover some foundational concepts here. So first of all, this is going to be a fire hose of information. Okay, so we got 90 minutes. And the intention with this call is, as you heard some of the guys on the call who just chimed in there, some people already know about this skill and are attempting to practice it. Others, it may be new to you and you might be hearing it for the first time. So the intention of this call really is to give you the concepts, give you some real world examples, and ask some and facilitate some questions and answers. However, what we really want you to do here is we really want you to take these concepts away and start reflecting on and implementing them in your life. And I will be very honest, and we'll talk about this more in the mastermind. This shit's hard, okay? It is really challenging to do this. And just so we set the table properly here, Ed and I, even though we're here teaching this, we screw this up frequently, okay? It's just that I tend to screw it up less than I ever had, less and less as time passes, but it's a very challenging thing to do. However, on the flip side of a challenge is a great reward, right? And when it works and you know that you have done it in a way that was a contribution and formed a connection, it is an extremely gratifying experience for both people. So, keep that in mind as we go through this.
And Jason, I just want to jump in and say that the thing to keep in mind is that validation is a skill. And so, if it's a newer skill for you, yeah, you might find that you forget to use it more often than you don't. But if you just keep thinking about validation and using it, you will become more proficient with it and you will see more effectiveness with it. So just go easy on yourself. You might totally fuck it up the first few times. Oh, sorry about that. Jason's mom is on the call.
She knows me.
Okay. You might mess it up the first few times, but it's something you always have another chance to have an interaction with your loved one and to try it again. So just the next time you just try to do it better.
Yeah. Awesome. Great point. Okay. So on to the foundational pieces. Okay. So I want to talk about dynamic effectiveness. And this is an idea that I've been thinking about a lot because really, what does it mean to be effective? To be effective, it means producing a decided, decisive, or desired effect, right? It means that I am doing the right things. Being efficient is doing things right. Being effective is doing the right things. And so, knowing the outcome that you want to achieve beforehand, or, maybe in a fluid way, helps you become more effective. Now, where we go wrong, especially as guys, is we focus on being right a lot of the time. And I'm sure everybody on this call knows what I'm talking about. So you get into a disagreement with someone, you're talking to someone who's upset. And what is important is that you try and you have a significant emotional investment in being right. But really what I'm going to ask you to bring some awareness to is focusing on being effective. Okay, it's always about being effective. And the interesting thing, and this is where the dynamic part of it comes in, is effective is context specific. So in other words, we have a million interactions with people in every type of context imaginable, different locations, whether it's at work or home, with different people, whether it's a spouse, friend, coworker, about different subjects, about subjects that have a different, say, level of emotional charge, about subjects that we agree or disagree on. All of these things, we bring all of our baggage with us, our life experience, our beliefs, our limiting beliefs, our preconceived notions, our stereotypes. All of these factors form this like melting pot that can produce some amazing results, and it can produce some crazy results, which lead you going like, what in the hell just happened here, right? So what it means to be effective is very dynamic. So for example, if I am in a situation with an upset spouse, for example, what it means to be effective in that context is very different than what it means to be effective in a conversation with an upset teenage daughter or an upset employee. So for example, if I have a teenage daughter who's upset, some of you know this example, some of you don't, I'll tell it later, but who wants to run away from home? What does being effective mean in that situation? Well, it's not, it's being right means convincing her that the feelings she's feeling don't make any sense, and why the hell would you be running away from this awesome home? And being effective is saying, I understand where it's being effective is forming the connection with her so she understands that she is loved and that she has a safe place to return home to, for example, even though I knew she wasn't going to run far away. So I was not about to allow my child to run away from home in any meaningful way. But here's the thing, and this goes back to what Ed was saying about it being a skill. Figuring this out in real time takes a lot of practice, okay? Because when you're in a situation that's emotionally charged, there may be very different levels of emotional charge. There may be history. There may be words thrown out that are hurtful and that dig up, like a knife sticking in you, and you might feel like there's all of these things, right? And so to be able to figure out how to be effective in real time in those situations is a skill that takes a hell of a lot of practice. So that's what the first foundational piece of this is. Always, always, always focus on what it means to be effective in a given situation. Because when you focus on how to be effective, you will think about how to be effective, and you will learn how to be effective, and you will become more effective. Okay, and that's really what we want. Okay, so I'm gonna turn this over to Ed, and he's gonna go over another foundational piece, which is some very important core assumptions that form sort of the lens through which you look at the world and through which you approach people and interactions.
Thanks, Jason. So the first core assumption is that the things people do make sense to them. So, whether it's a relatively benign interaction you're having with someone, or maybe a more heated interaction with someone, in that moment, whatever they're doing makes sense to them. And that kind of leads to the second point, which is that, you'll have a truth in the situation, and so will them. And if you're being curious, which is a key part of building on validation, trying to stay in a curious mode where you're in more of a questioning kind of state of mind, you'll realize that if that makes sense to them in that moment, then there's a truth that they have in what they're saying. you will also have a truth. But if you recognize that their truth has validity to them, it changes the way you approach the interaction and the way that you can have a conversation with them. And the third thing to keep in mind is that truly everyone typically is doing the best they can in the moment. Everyone can also try harder or try differently or use a different skill. However, if you once again approach the situation from the perspective of, if the person wasn't being somewhat dysregulated in that conversation they're having with you, that they truly, they might be showing a better sense of who they are, but in that moment they're doing the best they can. And once again, if you can keep that in mind, that really helps you from your perspective to not get upset yourself, let's say, and then stay in the moment and stay in a more effective conversation with them, as opposed to one in which you want to be right. The other core assumption is that it's always better to take a benign interpretation of what's going on. And that basically says that, you love this person, they love you, whether it's your spouse, your partner, a child, a coworker. And if you assume that this interaction is not them trying to poke a stick at you, but that it's really about them trying to be effective in conversation with you, once again, it changes the way you approach the conversation from your perspective. And then the third, that last bullet just talks about the fact that, if you consider that we're all in this together, this is someone that you either work with and respect, or if they're living at home with you, you love them, you care about them. If you keep that in mind, it helps to de-escalate perhaps some of the feelings that you might have in a heated situation with that person, whether they be at work, on the street, at home.
Okay, awesome. So I wanted to ask you a question here, Ed, because I think it's one that probably I know I wonder about, or have wondered about, and I bet you some of the guys in the call are. And it's about the assumption that everyone is doing the best they can in the moment. Because when you're dealing with someone who you think is being a complete idiot, and is making no sense, or is you feel like they're actually trying to harm you. Like, can you talk about what that, like, how could that, I think people's initial thought would be, how could this possibly be the best they're doing in the moment? So can you maybe talk us through that a little bit more? Because that's one of the really challenging assumptions.
Yeah, I mean, part of this, I think, is perspective. This is what I've kind of learned in the 2 years that I've been thinking about validation. They may be trying to poke a stick at you. There's no question that there's a chance that they could be. My theory is, though, when it comes to validation, if you assume that they're doing the best they can, how does that change the way you approach the situation? And just think about this. So right now, I'm having a conversation with you, Jason, and if you think that I'm poking a stick at you, what's your reaction? You're going to want to fight back?
Absolutely, I'm going to want to fight back.
Okay, so if we're having a heated debate and you think I'm doing the best you can, are you as inclined to fight back, or are you a little bit maybe more inclined to be curious? And it's that 1% shift, if you think that's possible, that makes the difference here.
Yeah, okay, that's great. I think that's super important. So it's, again, guys, it's about, or everyone, it's about being effective, not about being right. And I just wanted to touch on the taking a benign interpretation is better. So, and this is also extremely challenging, right? And we had a guy on the call, who's on the call right now, who we're talking about in our mastermind group, who was like, when my wife does this and this, she's trying to hurt me, right? Well, that's one way of looking at it. Absolutely, that's one way of looking at it. But as Ed said, that way of looking at it then creates sort of a cascade effect of behaviors and actions, for example, that will really typically escalate the situation. Where taking a benign interpretation would be saying, like, what is going on here? What's another way I could look at this? Because you don't know what the truth is. So you could take, you're looking through we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are, right? So if you acknowledge that and you say, okay, what's a different way to look at this? It'll really create a much more open-minded perspective to allow you to explore things and connect. So let me give you like a real world example here. So, as you guys, most of you know, who know me, my wife is German, right? So German people can be really super direct and, let's say, mildly critical from time to time. And so, what I would get, so this would happen was she would be critical, And I would interpret that as her being critical, and I would get defensive, and then nothing good ever came out of it. And I finally just decided, so what I was trying to do constantly, not constantly, I mean, it didn't happen that often, but what I was trying to do was I was trying to get her to change the way that she spoke to me, right? And one thing, if you take away anything from this call, it's that you can't change anybody else, okay? So you can only change you. So what I decided to do instead was I decided to search for a benign interpretation. So, which was, she wants what's best for me. And she wants me to live up to, the full potential, and to sort of maximize my capabilities. And because of I looking at her background and like her dad, who she's exactly like, I realized that this is one of the ways that she shows me that she loves me. And so you can imagine what the difference was when I take that as it's a way of her expressing how much she cares, believes in me, and loves me, how I react to it versus how I would react if I think it's being defensive. So that's if I'd be feeling attacked and me being defensive. So that's what taking a benign interpretation. Like, that's a real world example from my life. And let me tell you, again, I don't do this right every time. I'm probably at about 50-50 right now, but I was at 0 before. So I mean, it's a huge progress, but it takes time, and it takes screwing it up, and it takes reflecting on it. So those are the core assumptions that will help frame the lens, or create the lens through which you look at the world, which will put you in a better frame of mind and sort of headspace, and create the energy that will allow you to connect with people in a meaningful way and try to understand them. And all of these concepts are underpinned by curiosity. I think I had a slide about curiosity, but I think I missed it. So, so curiosity is, let's put it this way: when you approach life with a curious lens, you might be surprised to find that you actually learn shit. It's amazing how that works. So if you look at these assumptions, the things people do make sense to them. Think about how curiosity plays into that. Well, if someone's doing something that doesn't make sense to me, then being curious means I want to find out, like, why does that actually make sense to them? If there's no single truth, so stop looking for it. Well, curiosity says, well, I really want to understand their truth. Everyone is doing the best they can in the moment. Why is this the best they can do in the moment? Taking a benign interpretation is better. So being curious about searching for a different way that you could be looking at this situation. And curiosity does one other thing that is super important that we'll get into, and that is that it creates a space between stimulus and response. So many of us just respond on autopilot. Think of people that have been married for a long time. You've got these patterns of behavior, and it's stimulus response, like a single-celled organism, except we're conscious human beings. So by being curious about our own reactions, we can create we can widen the gulf between stimulus and response. And there's some pretty powerful, proactive choices you can make in that space. So curiosity is the foundation of everything. Okay, so we're going to talk about these 7 basic emotions. And the reason I want to talk about these is because there's a ton of, I think, stories that we tell ourselves around these emotions. So if you look at the first 5 emotions that are listed here: disgust, contempt, anger, sadness, and fear. Those are typically what we would consider negative emotions, right? Everything we read. So actually, before I say that, those are that we consider negative emotions. And when we have them, we try to move away from them, right? And so surprise, could be neutral. There could be a great surprise or a terrible surprise. And happiness, that's supposed to be the panacea that we all strive for. But think about so if you think about emotions, think about the fact that human beings have evolved to the point we are at today. Our emotions have evolved along with us. So they serve a valuable purpose. So in other words, every emotion is important and no emotion is good or bad. So for example, so the reason we label them as good or bad is about a whole bunch of different factors, societal factors, historical factors, the different language we use to describe it, like expectations. There's all of these things, and these emotions mean different things to different cultures. And so it really is it's almost like a social construct. It's not almost, it is a social construct about how we label and think about these emotions. So like use fear, for example. If I am a guy walking somewhere or walking into a situation and I feel fearful, in the world of a man's man, what would typically happen is I would feel the emotion of fear, and then I would judge myself for being weak for feeling that fear, right? And I would try to dismiss that fear, pretend I didn't feel it, maybe cover it up by acting all macho, whatever. However, it's obvious that fear serves a purpose. You're having a physiological response to some stimulus in your environment. And so fear might be telling you something really important, like there's a lion around the corner. So my point being that every one of these emotions has, say pros and cons, or it's like a multifaceted diamond, right? There's a million different ways to look at this. Happiness, for example. People that are constantly happy are shown, studies show that they're much more likely to be taken advantage of, because they don't have they're not in tune with some of their other emotions that might give them warning signs. So there are no good or bad emotions. So when you know that, what happens is it makes you, like when you accept that premise, it makes you realize that when your loved one is feeling these emotions, they're not good or bad. So if somebody is angry, there's a reason that they're feeling angry. It's telling you something, or if they feel happiness or fear, all of these things, if you accept that every emotion is valid, then that is a absolutely foundational prerequisite for emotional validation, because you are not going to validate somebody's emotions that you've told yourself a story about. Like, my spouse is angry with me, so that means she thinks less of me and doesn't respect me as a husband and blah, blah, blah. No, it's just there are no good or bad emotions. So if somebody's feeling an emotion, the job as an effective partner and an effective validator is to remove the labels from those emotions and then get real curious about what it is about that's behind those emotions. Okay, so that's kind of the 7 basic emotions. And now we're going to move into something that trips up an awful lot of people, and that is primary and secondary emotions. And I'm going to turn this over to Ed.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. Hey, one thing I want to say about the basic emotions as well, Jason, is that, as part of emotional validation, we're really trying to find out what kind of emotion the other person has. But in order to be effective, sometimes we have to kind of understand what our emotion is going into that interaction as well. And so if you don't mind me using your example of saying, sometimes you have an interaction and there seems to be crazy going. Well, what effect does that have on you? If that makes you get angry, that's something for you to understand as well before you start the interaction, because maybe anger is not the way you want to start talking, but maybe curiosity is the way you want to start. So just as a thought, in terms of primary and secondary emotions, the thing we need to keep in mind is that, and once again, this is really looking at the emotions that we might have, and the fact that we need to be able to look more deeply into the way we are experiencing that interaction, let's say with a loved one at home, or our spouse, or a child. And the best way to sort of define the difference between a primary and the secondary emotion is to use the example of driving in your car, and you're minding your own business on the road, and then someone comes zipping by and cuts you off. And I don't know what kind of reaction you tend to have, but I tend to anger. And so I might get really angry. And when I look at that, I understand that that's actually what's called a secondary emotion, because behind that anger is actually fear that I might have gotten hurt. Hey, they might have run me off the road. And so as we start to interact with our loved ones and try to be effective and more mindful of the kind of conversations that we're having with them, it's good to understand, if that anger we're experiencing at the crazy, use Hab's example, is actually anger, or is there something else behind it that is the emotion that's really driving what causes the anger? And it could be fear, it could be shame, it could be doubt, it could be any number of things. But it's useful to see, especially when we have a split second reaction to something, and often anger is sort of that split second reaction. It's useful to understand, hey, is there something deeper than that I maybe want to take a look at? And that's where that you have that gap that Jason just talked about, where you consider that, hey, maybe there's a different actual primary emotion that's driving this anger that I'm showing to the world, I'm showing to my loved one. The other thing to keep in mind with respect to emotions and our interactions with our loved ones is that, our ability to be effective in, let's say, the validation skill is somewhat predicated upon how full is the emotional bank account that each of us feel for each other. So, for instance, in my life, my wife and I are, I'll just put it out there, we're rebuilding our relationship. And one of the things that I realized, and I think Sarah would say the same thing, is that, our emotional bank account was pretty depleted. And so because of that, when we were interacting, we would sometimes revert to anger more quickly than we would if we had a more topped up emotional bank account, if there was more trust in that jar. And so it's also useful to kind of understand that when we launch out and start to do emotional validation, if you're using the skill effectively, it doesn't always work. And part of that might be related to the fact that that emotional bank account needs to be filled, trust needs to be put into it so that you can have more effective communications. And it just means that you need to keep trying harder and keep doing more validation. So, rather than getting an immediate reaction, it might be that you validate for a week and suddenly you notice a little shift. And I think a couple people in the intros actually talked about the fact that they've been using emotional validation and they're starting to see a shift. So just be aware that where that bank account is sitting may affect how quickly and how effectively emotional validation starts to work for you.
Yeah, and was there an example, Ed, that we were going to use here?
Yeah, I think there was. So, are we okay to use the example that popped up in the mastermind group without naming names, perhaps?
Yeah, without any names, I think.
Yeah. So there was an example in our mastermind group last week where one of the men posted that he was kind of feeling there was a double standard. Where his wife had gone out the week before and had come home later than she said she would. And then he did the same thing and came home later than he said he would. And she got quite upset with him and he felt there was a double standard there. And, it immediately made me think that there's a huge opportunity for a discussion around, that involves validation. But it also, the fact that, there was this joint sort of, or that there was this upset on his part probably meant that the emotional bank account probably needed to be topped up a little bit between these two. And that's where a skill like validation can really help out, because the more emotional validation is used with every attempt that you make to validate someone and the feelings that they have, and we're going to talk about what validation is in a minute, the more you actually fill that bank account, the more you actually fill that trust jar so that you can have what can be very difficult conversations. Does that make sense?
Awesome. Okay. So, and one thing I wanted to say, I want to give you an example, because you'll see this when we get into validation in a second here, but if you don't look for the secondary emotion underlying the emotion that's being expressed, then what's going to happen is you can very easily invalidate someone. So I'm going to give you an example with my first wife, Cindy, and how I invalidated her all the time. And so an example would be, so she had mental health issues, obviously. And so she was emotionally dysregulated, which basically means, like, think of it as like kind of losing control of your emotions, right? Just being consumed by your emotions. And so she would often express those emotions. It's just like total rage, total friggin' rage. And so what I would do is I would either scream back at her, but mostly that didn't happen that often, but mostly what I would do is I would point out to her all the reasons her being upset made no sense at all. And so, but what I never did was look for the secondary emotion. And that secondary emotion might have been a number of things. It might have been shame or humiliation about being mentally ill, quote, mentally ill, or all the destruction that she had caused, or lonely because she had no friends left because nobody wanted to have anything to do with her, or a sense of abandonment because she felt like I was the only person, I was the person who was supposed to be closest to her, and I had done something yet again to hurt her in her mind, right? But I never ever thought about searching for that secondary emotion because I didn't even know it was a thing. All I was like, man, this crazy person's mad at me again, and just acted accordingly. And also didn't use benign interpretation, and thought she's trying to hurt me. She is like intentionally pushing my buttons, all those things, And so looking for primary and secondary emotions is pretty powerful. So I want to just open this up really quick. Does anybody have any examples from their own life where maybe, for example, you have acted in a certain way because you were feeling a certain emotion? So you may have lashed out in anger, for example, because you were feeling a different emotion, like maybe insecurity or fear or anything under the surface. Does anybody have an example from their own life that they want to share, or maybe even a pattern of behavior that they want to share? This is your time. Somebody put up their hand.
I'll chime in quick. Can you hear me, Jason?
Yes,
Rob?
we can, sir. Thanks, Rob.
So yeah, this happens to me all the time. My youngest daughter, she's a crazy kid. She's very active. She hurts herself all the time. And my initial reaction is I always get upset. I'm almost like angry almost. Why did you do that? And I get angry, but I know that's a secondary emotion, basically from you guys and from Ed. But I'm not exactly sure what the primary emotion is, but I know that that's not what's really bothering me. I think I'm scared, or I'm afraid that she's actually really going to hurt herself one time. And it just comes out as anger all the time.
Yeah, it might be frustration too, right? Because how many times have you talked to her and told her to be careful? And, that very well could be it as well. But that's a great example, Rob. And I think that level of awareness that you're bringing to it is super important, right? So that's what we mean by primary and secondary emotions. And here's the thing, I'm going to keep coming back to curiosity. Curiosity is what will allow you to, in the moment, explore what might be that secondary emotion.
Yeah, and Jason, I'll just add to that as well to say, when you're looking at primary and secondary emotions, you're digging into what you hope to find is that kernel of truth for that person, which could be driving that primary emotion. And we're going to, that's part and parcel of this whole concept of validation as well, their kernel of truth.
Yes, absolutely. So the next thing that is an absolute prerequisite in my book for being able to effectively validate someone is self-acceptance and self-compassion. Okay, so self-compassion is extending compassion to oneself in instances of perceived inadequacy, failure, or general suffering. So in other words, what do we do to ourselves when we make a mistake, say something dumb, do something that we think is a failure, don't feel good enough, whatever. We oftentimes, especially high achieving people, tend to beat ourselves up about it, right? Well, self-compassion is, really allowing yourself to be gentle, just to be gentle with yourself because all of these things like perceived inadequacy, failure, or general suffering, that's called life. That happens to every single person over and over and over again, typically, and especially to people who are pushing themselves and putting themselves out there. So treating yourself with kindness, this is common sense when you say it out loud, but treating yourself with kindness is a prerequisite for truly treating somebody else with kindness in my book, because that kind of connection and that kind of transfer of energy is a two-way street. So the more deeply you love and accept yourself, the more deeply you can love and accept others. And this is very important, this last point, because somebody brought this up actually in our mastermind group the other day, and I hadn't really thought about it too much, but when you validate your own emotions, you can validate the emotions of others. So think about this for a second. where we get into a world of hurt is when we have an emotion and then we have an emotion about the emotion, right? So we might have an emotion of fear, and instead of recognizing that for what it is, which is a normal human emotion and a source of information, what we do is we say, again, I'm feeling fear, therefore I'm weak. Or we tell ourselves stories about this. So when we start judging our own emotions and start labeling our own emotions, it sends us down a rabbit hole that's hard to get out of. But here's the thing. If you are judging your own emotions, you are not accepting the fundamental premise that our emotions are what make us human. And so feeling sadness or fear or contempt or disgust or happiness, they're all important. They're all part of what makes us human. So when you accept that, it gives you the ability to validate your own emotions, which is, like, I'll give you an example. I was at a thing last month, and I was around a group of really high level people, and I found myself feeling quite insecure. I won't go into all the details, and I'm going to talk about this in the summit, but I found myself feeling quite insecure around these kind of people because I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing here? Like with these people. But the point is that what I would have done in the past is I would have beat myself up for that. First, I probably actually would have ignored it. Actually, I don't feel insecure, but there would have been a voice inside my head also telling me, yeah, you're insecure because you're weak. And I mean, I would have been using worse words than this. This is, you guys are getting the gentle version of me because my parents are on the call. But I would have judged myself for feeling insecure. Like I really would have beat myself up about it, about not being a man. But what I did instead was I just said, okay, I feel insecure. I wonder why that is. And I compassionately inquired, why do I feel insecure right now? And I actually figured it out in the moment, right? But the point is that I was able to validate my emotions. Oh, I feel insecure. Considering I understand why I feel secure, and now I can move past it. So when you can accept that all emotions are valid and you can validate your own emotions, then you can validate the emotions of others. Because if you are judging the emotions you're feeling and labeling them as, really negative, it's pretty hard for you not to do the same thing to anybody that you're talking to, because you have stories about these emotions. So lose the stories, validate your emotions, acknowledge that your emotions are what make you human, and then that will give you a core foundation to help you validate the emotions of others. But it all starts with you. You can only change you. So love yourself, and then watch what happens as as a result, love others more deeply. Okay, here we go. Ed, do you want to take this one? We're getting to the foundation's over. We're now into the meat and potatoes, I guess we would say.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jason. So what is emotional validation? It's the process of learning about, understanding, and expressing acceptance of another person's emotional experience. So what does that mean? It really means, it's taking an empathic view to the interaction that you're having with that person, and really trying to understand through curiosity and benign interpretation, and some of the other skills that we've talked about tonight, to understand exactly, what that kernel of truth is for them. What's that emotional experience that they're having in that moment with you? And it may be a different truth from the one that you're having, but that's okay, because this is really about putting yourself into their shoes and walking in their shoes. And, Jason's going to show a great slide in a minute, but it's basically, putting yourself in their head, putting yourself in their shoes, putting yourself in their feelings, and trying to understand exactly where they're coming from. And that's where, if we can move from, let's say, anger to curiosity as our sort of go-to for validation, then it allows us to approach it differently and to see if we can, express that empathy, or have, basically express empathy in action. And that's really the key of what emotional validation is. Yeah. I don't know, Jason, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think what you said is great. It really is an active form of empathy. So if you're going to emotionally validate someone, the more effective you are at considering all of the factors that might lead to the reason that the person is feeling the feelings that they're feeling, the better you will be. So, and that could be all kinds of factors. It could be biological factors, like how emotionally sensitive are they? You know, how reactive are they? Just by their nature. You know, like what is their story? What is their situation? What is their you know, where are they at in their life? What are some of the other things that have happened to them? Like all of these things, like the emotions we feel in every moment are a sort of a product of all of those things. Because again, it's how we view the world. It's how we react to each other. So, so your ability to be very curious about, you know, all the multifaceted variables that might contribute to why someone is experiencing what they're experiencing in the moment will allow you to be more empathetic. And it really is stepping outside your own head and trying through love to get inside somebody else's and feel what they are feeling. And it's hard, man. It's really hard, especially when this person is doing a bunch of shit that you think makes no sense and is driving you insane. Right? Mm-hmm. It's really, really hard. But that's what validation is. And sometimes it's nothing more than sitting in the shit with the other person. Okay. And we're going to talk about what validation is, like some examples, and what it isn't, because there's some misconceptions about it. But you know what? Sometimes people just want nothing more than you to be there with them in the, you know, to be heard and understood, and for you to be present with them in what they're feeling and not try to change it, not try to give advice, just be there with them. And you will be surprised at how more often than not, that's all somebody needs. So what emotional validation is not? Okay, so this is super important, because as we get into some of the examples here, I really want you to understand. I really want to make sure that we understand what validation is. So it's not agreement. Like, so for example, if somebody is saying something to you that absolutely makes no sense to you, or you know, you think is ridiculous or whatever, you don't have to agree with it. That's not what validation is. Okay, it's not accepting bad behavior. So just because there are no good or bad emotions, it doesn't mean that there's, you know, not good or bad behavior. So you might be feeling really, you know, super upset that your best friend just cheated on your best friend, or your girlfriend just cheated on you with your best friend. Okay, yeah, it's normal to feel anger and contempt and all of those things. But like stabbing him in the face is not acceptable, right? So there are still boundaries around what is, you know, acceptable behavior, and that's for everybody to determine for themselves. It's not condoning crazy, okay? Absolutely not condoning crazy. It's not encouragement, okay? It's not being like somebody, you know, says, "Oh my God, so and so really pissed me off," or I'm really upset because of this, and you being like, "Yeah, you have a right to be upset. Yeah, you know." Like pumping them up and like escalating the situation. It's not cheerleading. It's not manipulation. So I'll give you an example. It's not like you could use validation. I mean, okay, let's be totally honest here. There's times I've really thought about validating my wife just so she'll stop talking, even though I have no interest in actually validating her, right? So like, just like, oh yeah, you must be so upset. And meanwhile, I'm like, I just want to watch TV, you know, or whatever. Like that's manipulation. And by the way, that doesn't work. So I would really highly recommend you don't try that. I'm speaking from deep personal experience here. It's not the removal of boundaries, right? So again, it doesn't mean that, for example, validating that a kid is upset about something, about validating the kid is not, validating the kid is upset about not being able to go out with her friends later than you want her to. Doesn't mean, it's not the same as saying, oh, because you're upset, you can go out with whoever you want for as long as you want. It's not being a wimp. And the next two are super important. And this is for the dudes on the call. Okay. Validation, guys are fixers, right? We got to solve, everything's a problem to be solved. Validation is not problem solving. So what we always do, or not always, but often do, is we go right to problem solving, man. I'm upset. Well, here's all you need to do to not be upset. Like, Jesus, get on with it. You know, and then, oh my God, why is my wife or, you know, my partner furious with me? how did that happen? I was just trying to give him or her the amazing advice that I have in my head that I know will work. Why won't they take it? Where did this go wrong? Oh my God. Like that validation is not problem solving. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not a space for problem solving, but you got to do it in the right order. You validate first, and then if both after in that connection that might be formed with validation, if both people agree, you can move to problem solving. And lastly, and I have this one in bracket in bold text, it is not fixing the other person. Okay, so validation again is about being effective in the moment. However, it will not fix the other person because, so let's say, for example, now it can contribute to possibly creating the conditions where the other person takes a different look at how they're feeling, and it might trigger, it might trigger change. But really, it's about, you need to approach validation from the perspective of, it's about me being effective in this moment. So I'll give you an example of how it can actually help. So for example, if the person you're interacting with is super upset about something, helping them understand that what they are feeling, that you hear and understand them, and that you are not holding any judgment against them for feeling that way, might help contribute to them removing the judgment that they're placing on their own feelings, which will allow them to process them and move through them more quickly. That's definitely a possibility. I mean, I've seen that in my real life, like in my own life, a number of times, right? So because you're removing the judgment, it may contribute to the other person also removing the judgment. Because I think a lot of times we judge ourselves and we judge what we're feeling and what we're doing based on how we think other people are thinking or are going to react to it, right? So if you show that you are reacting from a place of empathy and compassion, it can help the other person be compassionate towards himself. However, that's not the reason. That's not the primary reason to do it. The primary reason to do it is to be effective and to connect with the person that you're talking with. Anybody have any questions about that before we move on? Because I think that's important, and there can be, and this is also challenging to do in the moment. So I'm going to just take a pause here to see if anybody has any questions, or really about anything that we've talked about so far. And then if we do, we'll happily answer them. Otherwise, we'll move on. So speak now.
Hey, Jason, if there aren't any questions, I've got a great example of cheerleading that might be useful, but
Sure.
Let's see if there are some questions first.
All right, guys, this is your chance. Silence, silence, silence. All right, Ed, take it away.
Sure. So cheerleading is something that we often do with our kids. So for those on the call who have younger kids, if it can be as benign as a kid playing with their friend, and the friend says something and your child feels stupid, and they come up to you and they say, "I'm really stupid." Typically, as parents, what we want to do is say, "No, you're not," and then give them 20 reasons why. And what we're unaware of is that although we might have had the best of intentions, that's actually a really invalidating thing from an emotional perspective. And so, the opportunity here, if you will, when your child comes up to you and says something like that, is to try to find out what the emotion is behind that and connect to that. And we can give some examples later on, but that's a prime example of where we cheerlead instead of trying to connect to the emotion that person might have, big or small.
Yeah, or another one that might be completely counterintuitive is your spouse saying, "I'm fat." Or maybe your kid saying that, and you saying, "Oh, no, you're not. You're not, like, you're gorgeous," and all this kind of stuff. That's actually not the right thing to say. The right thing to say is, "Man, it must be so upsetting that you feel that way." And, and we'll get into how you validate, but, just because what you're basically doing there is you're telling them that the emotion that they are feeling is not valid. And that's the opposite of what you want to do, but it's what we always want to do as guys. Okay, so benefits of emotional validation: helps people feel like they belong, reducing and de-escalating conflicts. Like, think about it. Think about when you have been upset with somebody about something. And, I should back up and say validation is it's not only about dealing with people that are upset. Validating like happy emotions is amazing too, right? So I'll give you an example of something my wife does. So she's German, And so, as I said, and so she's pretty matter of fact, like a good outcome is just expected. Like, why would it not be expected? If you prepare, think of every detail and variable, follow the process, like obviously you're going to get the expected outcome. So if I come home, like I'm like, oh my God, this amazing thing happened at work where I had this amazing, interaction with person or blah, blah, she'll go, good. She's like, fuck, Jocko, good. And I'm like, can't you just celebrate my joy? So validating a person is also connecting with them around, the emotion, all the emotions, not just the negative ones. I wanted to make sure I illustrated that point. So valid benefits are reducing and de-escalating conflicts. Think about it. I mean, when you are upset with someone, and somebody goes to you, man, I can see you're really upset about that. And, God, if that happened to me, or, I can see that you really feel like I did something to hurt you. And I mean, that I'd be super upset about that too. Like, I mean, if you react that way to somebody who's upset about something, very few people stay mad in that situation. It's totally a conflict de-escalator, feeling heard and understood. As I said before, it helps people process their own emotions. It improves communications, right? Because when you are talking, when you are forming that connection, when somebody feels heard and understood and they feel safe and they feel not judged, they are just naturally going to feel more communicative because this is a way of being effective, but you will have created a place where it's safe to talk about real stuff. So that's how validation can create that environment of safety and connection that improves communication. Like it improves sex and intimacy. Like seriously, guys, if your wife feels heard and understood, you're getting laid more. Okay, enough said. Sets the table for collaborative problem solving. Okay, so I think my mother didn't hear that. Jesus, I forgot they were on the call. Sets the table for collaborative problem solving. So as I said before, when you make that connection through validation, what you will find is where normally the normal way you do it, which is jump immediately to problem solving, and it often goes wrong, especially with the teenagers, let me tell you, then what you will find is that when you create that connection and you help them feel heard and understood, it really creates the conditions where you can move into collaborative problem solving. And it helps you learn more about the other person and yourself. So when you understand and are curious, just the natural result of being curious is that you learn. So when you really truly try to understand what's causing someone to feel the way they feel, and all of the factors, you ask questions. And through asking questions, you actually learn something. And you also learn about yourself because you learn about what triggers you. For example, some of the things that drive you crazy that make you go sort of off the deep end. You learn about how you react to certain situations. You learn about how you are effective in creating dialogue and connection with another person. Just a question there. Let's see, 1 sec. Okay, so those are the benefits of validation. How do we invalidate people? And you guys, I suspect, I'm going to turn this over to Ed, but I think you guys are going to see, like me, like all of us, that how frequently we invalidate people, and often with the best of intentions. And I think that's an important thing to remember. We don't just validate people because we're trying to diminish them or dismiss them. We often do it with the purest of intentions. So I'll turn it over to you, Ed.
Sure, thanks. So how do we invalidate people? There's a number of ways that we can do it. And, the first item there talks about ordering the person to feel differently. So someone says, they feel a certain way, and we can very benignly, say something like, well, you don't really feel that way. And that is completely invalidating their experience of what's happening. The other item, the next one talks about ordering the person to look differently. And I'm not sure exactly what the context is there, Jason, on that particular item.
So it's like you look upset, like they look upset. Why are you looking upset? Like, put a smile on your face, for God's sakes.
Got it. Thank you. Next item talks about denying the person's perception. So once again, their reality, their truth, we say, no, that's not what you're seeing. It should actually be this based on the experience that you're having. But that's your truth. It's not necessarily their truth. So it's always important to understand when we're validating is that in that moment, that kernel of truth for that person is their perception and it's real for them. We try to make the other person feel guilty. So something happens and, we use judgment or guilt to, make them feel uncomfortable or make them feel wrong or make them feel like what they're experiencing is wrong. And that is completely invalidating and, depletes that trust jar so fast. Next item talks about minimizing a person's feelings. So once again, emotional validation talks to us about the need to connect to someone's feelings. And in that moment, that feeling that they have that they may be expressing to you is real. And for them, it's real. It may not be the same perception that you have. And so by trying to minimize a feeling that someone has, we actually invalidate that experience for them.
Hey, and I just posted in the chat. I just want to say, like, an example would be like, "Oh, come on, it's not that bad," right? Like,
yeah,
suck it up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you, Jason. Falling back on reason and logic. So this is something that we as guys tend to do a lot, where let's say our wife, our spouse is giving us some sort of an emotional reaction to what's going on, and we try to apply reason or logic to it. And it can be as simple as the statement that Jason just posted, which, hey, it's not that bad. This is not that big a deal. Why are you blowing up? Why is this interaction getting heated? And that's very invalidating for that person. Debating someone's feelings with them. So, this is something that I've certainly been guilty of more than once or twice in my time with my wife. So, just trying to be right by saying, well, what you should be feeling is this, when actually that person's feelings in that moment are their own feelings, and we just have to acknowledge that as their truth in that moment. Judging and labeling things. So something happens in an interaction with one of your loved ones, and we put a judgment on it, we put a label on it, and that's really not helpful for them, because once again, whatever that emotion they're feeling doesn't require us to judge it or to label it, but what it really impresses upon us, validation impresses upon us the need to connect to that emotion if we can, to have empathy and try to understand the emotion as opposed to trying to judge it or label it as being right or wrong or something else. If we show intolerance or impatience towards someone, and this can be as simple, by the way, as when you think about impatience, if you're having a long extended conversation with someone and you do what Jason just did and pulled up his phone and started looking at it while the conversation is going on, not to call you out, Jason, but it can be—
I was doing that to simulate an example, actually.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So that's a great way of showing, invalidating someone. And I'm still very guilty of this. I find that I have to force myself to put my phone kind of out of reach so that I can have a more effective conversation, certainly with my wife and with my daughter at times as well. And then making it all about you, that can be very invalidating, where someone expresses an emotion and that triggers something in us. And as opposed to trying to validate that emotion and connect to it, what we start talking about is how it makes us angry that they say that. And once again, we've just flipped it into something about us, as opposed to trying to connect to what they're expressing to us, trying to be empathetic to them.
And that last one might also be like, "Oh, you think you have it bad? Listen to what happened to me today. You got nothing to complain about, right?" So, yeah. So that's great. So I want to just, Rob asked a question in here, and I think this is a really important one, and I got some good responses. So Rob's question is, sometimes when I feel like I try to validate, it comes off insincere or like I'm just blowing smoke. How can I avoid this? So I guess my question to you, Rob, would be, how do you know that it comes off as insincere or blowing smoke?
Well, I talked to my wife about it a little bit, and she told me that that's how she would feel if I said that, or her mom said that to her, like, oh, I can see how that would bother you, or I can see how that would make you feel that way. She said that would piss her off more. It feels like it's insincere.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So some of the other guys had some really good comment, which I think is important, but did you have anything on that, Ed?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean that's an honest reaction, and at least she's telling you that. And one of your responses could be, "Hey, I'm not seeing it that way, but obviously you are. So I'm wondering if you could tell me more." Tell me more is a great line to use when you're in validation and you might not know where to go, because that's one of those areas where, shit, I just validated and she's saying I'm not. And by the way, if they don't feel validated, then it's not validation. So that's where, you have an opportunity to say, I'm kind of lost here. Can you tell me more? And just remember that tell me more is a great next question when you find that your first validation doesn't work. And what we learn is that you may need to validate 2, 3, 4 times in a conversation before you can even start talking about how do we fix this problem. So it's okay, Rob. You just need to come back with another validation question, and tell me more is a great one. Like you can honestly say, wow, I'm lost. I don't know what to say, but I'd really like to learn more. Can you tell me more? That's a great response.
Yeah, and I think too, like truly, sincerely helping her see that you are committed to truly seeing the situation from her perspective and really trying to understand it and being empathetic. I mean, some of the guys said, there's not much more you can do than that, right? Like in a situation like that. So if she's not willing to accept that, my experience is that hardly ever happens, like almost never. But regardless, it may happen, and you can only control you. So if you're coming at it from a curious, compassionate, and empathetic, truly empathetic point of view, I would say keep doing it, or ask her, like Reggie said, ask her what she wants to hear instead. Maybe she doesn't. I don't know the answer specifically, but it's all of those things. But I would say that really just approaching it with genuine compassion, curiosity, and empathy is pretty much always a great way to go. Okay, why we invalidate people. Okay, so we invalidate people because we are listening to respond instead of to learn, right? So in other words, I'm just going to wait till this person stops talking so I can give them the benefit of my point of view. Instead of saying, look, what is the actual message being delivered here and what can I learn from it? Again, focus on being right versus being effective. So in other words, trying to point out how the other person is wrong is not a really good way to actually make them feel heard and understood. We want to sound smart or look good. So for example, we might want to jump right into problem solving because it makes us feel like we're smart. Oh, you're feeling like this? Well, man, I've got the other answer. I've got the answer. Obviously, I've got the answer, and here it is. And here's what you should do. So, and I've done this a lot, because spending most of my life as quite an insecure person, it was really important for me to sound smart and look good. So I did this a lot. We want to fix people's feelings because we're uncomfortable with them. Like, for any guys that have kids, and especially teenagers, and maybe especially teenage daughters, it can be uncomfortable. Like there's some serious upset that goes on, whether it's whatever, it doesn't matter, but it can be like for example, hearing your kid who's tired and has just done poorly on a test bawling because they feel like the stupidest kid in the world is extremely uncomfortable. It's awful to see your kids suffering like that. So oftentimes what we try to do is we try to say, like I've been in this situation, and oftentimes we feel so uncomfortable with them that we just want to change it. No, God, you're not stupid. Look at all the evidence that tells you you're not stupid, right? Instead of saying, man, I can see that you're just feeling so upset and frustrated right now. And, I have tried things and I have failed at them too. And I'm telling you, there's so many times where I felt stupid too. And it's normal. It is normal to feel like that. Many people do when you try something and it doesn't work out, or you feel like you worked hard and not gotten the result. Like that's validation. You're not stupid. Look at all the reasons you're not stupid. So, but that for me as the person, as the dad, that's uncomfortable, man. And the last thing is we don't understand what it means to be fully present. So fully present in heart, body, spirit, mind, all of it, fully present with nothing else going on. So it doesn't mean like they said to checking your phone or looking at your watch or glancing over to TV or rolling your eyes or sighing or all those things. It means that I am here with you and there's nothing else. That's truly present, and that's what creates a connection. So that's why we invalidate. So I'm going to turn this over to Ed. So there's 6 levels of validation. Okay, so Ed, do you want to run through these?
Sure, sure. And jump in with any commentary on these as well, Jason.
Yeah.
So, the first level of validation is being totally present with the person. So it can be as simple as making sure that you maintain eye contact with them when you're having a conversation with them. And, just making sure that they're aware that you're there, leaning in during a conversation. Those are things that allow you to be fully present. Accurate reflection. So accurate reflection just talks about the fact that you're staying in that curious mode. And I'm probably going to need you to give me an example here, Jason, of what you meant by accurate reflection here. But actually, I'm going to ask you to just give me an example on this particular one right here.
Yeah, so it's really trying to, accurately sort of reflect what the person is telling you is basically what that means, right? So
Okay.
in other words, if somebody's telling you something and it's really trying to understand what they're telling you in the context of the situation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. The next item down talks about reading a person's behavior and guessing what they might be feeling. So this is where, it's really important to stay in that mode of curiosity and being mindful of how you're feeling as well, so that you can stay curious and try to understand what they're feeling. And it may mean that you have to ask a couple questions to get to that feeling. You may guess wrong the first time, and then, on a second or third attempt, you kind of understand where they're coming from, because then that helps you to understand the behavior that you might be seeing from the person as well. The next point talks about understanding the person's behavior in terms of their history and biology. So this is where if you know something about this person and you're having a conversation with them, and this is probably more pertinent when you're looking at a loved one in your family, a spouse, a child. And, if there's a history there of them being reactive to a certain conversation that you have, then it's understandable for you to kind of put that into perspective as you have the conversation with them. It could be things like their biology as well. And I don't know if you have a specific example around that one, Jason.
Yeah, so some people are more naturally sensitive and reactive, right? So
Okay.
people feel things more deeply than other people. So knowing that about someone is recognizing that their behavior might be a result of that, or in terms of their history. Like, say you're in your second marriage, and with your partner, their first marriage ended because their first partner cheated on them or had this long affair that just devastated their trust. Well, if you think about that and you are aware of it, you can see how perhaps that might influence your behavior if you are going to a conference of some sort for work. You know what I mean? And instead of just dismissing it, looking at their history and biology and recognizing that that informs their behavior right now.
Great, thank you. The next item talks about normalizing or recognizing emotions anyone would have. This is where you just prove that you're as human as that person is that you're talking to. And it can be as simple as the example that Jason gave. So, his daughter does a test and she flunks and does really poorly at it and feels stupid. Jason's comment back was, I've had many times in my life where, I wrote a test and maybe wasn't effective, and I felt that same way too. So just normalizing to saying, hey, that's part of the human experience. And the last item talks about radical genuineness, where, you look at things that might be working right. So let's say on that test that your daughter failed, you can say, wow, I saw that you really tried hard, you studied hard, and you gave it your best, and it just didn't work out this time. And I can understand how you feel about that, but I want to acknowledge the effort that you put into it. So it's just being really genuine in terms of the support that you're offering that person and connecting to that emotion, but also recognizing the fact that you've seen that they gave it everything they had, and it just didn't work out this time.
Perfect. And what I wanted to say too is when on the third point, reading a person's behavior and guessing what they might be feeling, don't worry about guessing wrong. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you guess wrong, they'll tell you. Absolutely. Oh, I can see you're feeling, super frustrated about that. I'm not frustrated. I'm pissed. They're going to tell you that, right? So don't be afraid of guessing because you will guess wrong from time to time. So those are the 6 levels of validation. And actually, before we go to questions, I wanted to say, like, fundamentally, I can't believe I could include a slide on this learning opportunity for me. But validation fundamentally is this: it's acknowledging another person's, acknowledging, understanding, and accepting another person's emotional experience. That's the first part. The second part is that acknowledging that under the circumstances and through the lens through which they are looking at the world, that their emotion makes sense to them. It doesn't have to make sense to you. That's it. So if remember that, okay? It's acknowledging, understanding and accepting another person's emotional experience. And it's recognizing that under the circumstances with their history, biology, all of those factors, that stepping into their shoes, that the emotion that they are experiencing makes sense under all of those circumstances. That's what it is. Okay. Mm-hmm. So before we go to questions, I wanted to give a couple of examples of validation and action. Ed, maybe you want to chime in with a few too. So I'm going to give you an example of one with my daughter. Some of you have heard this. So when she started grade 9 this year. Okay. So at the beginning of grade 9, she was feeling incredibly overwhelmed with everything. And we're talking like everything. And so, she was at a new school. She didn't know anybody. She was, she had to walk to school. She's still mildly resentful about that, but too bad. Because validation, I can acknowledge that she hates walking to school, but you're walking to school. So, but anyways, so it was very overwhelming for her for the first, say, probably week and a half. And so what she would do is she was like losing it. Like she was so upset. Don't make me go back to school, like begging not to go back to school. And so what I would have done in the past is I would have said, okay, so you got to stop crying, because crying is not going to help you solve this problem, right? And what she would have done was she would have probably stopped crying, actually, because she wants to please her dad. And then I would have praised her for stopping crying, and then I would have gone right to problem solving, right? So what I would have taught her is that she gets praise from her dad when she does not express the emotion she's feeling. Now, I never would have thought of that. I was really literally just trying to help. Let's calm the hell down so we can get to problem solving. But it turns out there was no problem to actually be solved. Okay, so what I did instead was I said, she's crying, and I'm like, I can see you're feeling totally overwhelmed. So acknowledging, acknowledging, understanding, and accepting her emotional experience. I can see that you're feeling totally overwhelmed. And you know what? Starting grade 9 is a huge deal. You are going to a different school. It's way bigger. The class structure is different. You don't know anybody. There's all of these things that are going on. And it's totally understandable that you would feel overwhelmed, because I was in the same situation when I was in grade 9, actually. And it took me 3 weeks to get my footing and to start feeling like I knew what was going on. So I get it. I get that you feel overwhelmed. And so the second part was, is that normalizing her emotional experience. Yeah, man, in your situation, I get it's totally understandable to feel overwhelmed. And her level of, emotional arousal, let's say, it was like turning the temperature down on the thermostat. And there was no problem that needed to actually be solved. She just needed to be heard and understood. And it was like, it was like letting the air out of a balloon. I'll give another example with my wife, whose mother is dying of stage 4 cancer. Okay. And as a husband, the feelings of helplessness can be painful, obviously, right? But what I find is that there's no problem to be solved. It's not, the issue is not something that I can solve. Her mother has cancer, and she's probably going to die from it. So what I do instead is, if my wife is feeling upset about it, it's just validating her, oh my God, your mom is dying, and you're upset. And I mean, I can't even imagine what it would be like to be facing the death of my parents in this way. I don't even know what that would be like. So, if you're open to, I'm just so grateful that you're open to sharing your experience with me. And I'm sure that I would be feeling the same way if I was in this situation. And it's just connection, connection that leads to more talking. It's gentle and it's compassionate. So those are a couple examples. Now, those aren't examples when somebody's like basically freaking out in your face, obviously. But Ed, maybe you can give an example that's more on that end of the scale.
Well, that's how I was going to finish, to say that, this emotional validation skill that we've been talking about this evening, it's really important, and it can be used in really tense situations. So this course that I facilitate, that allowed Jason and I to meet a number of months ago, is actually a course that we give to family members of people who are caring for a loved one who has often quite severe mental health challenges, to the point that they may be harming themselves. I teach typically to parents who have a loved one who can be quite emotionally dysregulated, to the point that they have ideation around suicide. And the thing I want to impress upon everyone is that there's always something to validate. So for those of us on the call who are parents, like what goes through your mind when your kid comes up to you and says, you'd be better off if I was dead, if I wasn't here, if I wasn't dragging the family down. And there's a lot of fear that people typically have around getting into validation around that conversation. And so what our initial reaction is to say things like, oh, it can't be that bad, tomorrow's a better day, don't worry. And that's completely invalidating, and that removes trust from the jar. And what validation teaches us is that there is something to validate in that interaction with that loved one who's contemplating suicide potentially. And it's that it's responding with, wow, you must feel really bad to feel that this family would be better off without you, that I'd be better off without you. And I don't see it that way. And I'd like to better understand what's going on for you. Can you tell me more? So this skill can be used anywhere, in any kind of situation, even the very extreme ones. And the thing I would challenge everyone in this call to remember is that there's always something to validate, even if it's in a less extreme situation. There's always something you can look to connect to, and that's that emotion that the person has. So, keep that curiosity. Be aware of your own feelings as you go into an interaction with someone. And if you see that you're starting to get hot and bothered, that's something that you need to look at afterwards. But stay curious and ask questions, and and try to connect to that emotion. It's so powerful.
Awesome. Yeah. And I wanted to say one last thing. I actually use this at work today. So this makes you, again, it makes you effective everywhere. So I had a situation today where there was a project manager who was, on this project, and it's late. And one of my team just got assigned to it. So anyways, he comes to me and he goes, I need this person's time 100% of the time. We're behind on this project, and blah, blah, blah. And I just said, I said, holy man, I can see this is like getting this project done is super, like getting it done. I know it's late, and getting it done as quickly as possible is super important to you. And, it's funny because I know what it's like to be in a situation where you feel like you're herding cats. It's super frustrating, man. Like, I get it. So let's explore how we might be able to figure this out together. I'm totally open to doing that. And it was just like, whew, boom, awesome meeting, sorted it out, and built a relationship at the same time. So you can do this everywhere. So guys, listen, that wraps up the majority of the content. So I wanted to open it up for questions, and feel free. We're coming up to sort of the end of the time, but I mean, I'm open to. We're here, so we'll answer whatever questions you guys have, because I think this is really important. We want to give you as much to take away from this call as we can, so you can go and apply this and be effective as all get out.
Jason, I've asked you this a bunch of times, and this is, I think, the part that I don't get. At what point do you actually solve the problem, dude? Because if you're constantly validating the same thing over and over and over again, when do you actually get to solve the problem?
That's a great question. I'm going to turn that over to Ed. I think Ed probably has some good insight on this one.
Oh man. I mean, every situation is different, and I don't know what your personal situation is, but the sort of general rule in a single interaction is that you try to validate 3 times and then you sort of talking about problem solving. The reality is, I guess the first thing I would want to understand is, is that person feeling validated? And so you may need to, if you find that you're validating, if it's true and they're not feeling validated and you can't get the problem solving, then you probably better find out what it'll take to validate them. And I don't know if that's the situation, but that's the first thing I would try to find out, to say, hey, does it feel like I'm connecting to the way you're feeling? Because if I'm not, please help me. Because you can't really, if the emotions are still there and they're riding high, you can't really get to validation or to problem solving if you haven't connected with them. It makes it really, really hard.
Yeah, I mean, I think in our situation, neither one of us really validates. We just try to. I think we're really more focused on being right, because we just don't agree with the way one or the other's feeling. And I just don't see where, like, validating. I mean, I get it, but I just don't see where validating is going to help the situation, because we're not agreeing with each other. Neither one of us is agreeing with one another.
But once again, though, I mean, validation isn't about agreeing with the person, it's connecting to their emotion, right? So if you're trying to look for agreement, then you're looking to be right. And so I would take a step back and say, spend the time connecting to the emotion. I'm assuming it's your wife, but
Yes.
Find out what's going on in her mind, what's the emotion she's feeling, and connect to that before you try to figure out whether you're right or she's right, because that's counterproductive to validation and to being effective, actually, at the end of the line. So I think you need to find out if you truly are validating her. It sounds like you might not be, or it sounds like maybe you both need to top up that emotional bank account for a while with validation before you can really start talking about how do we make things better. That's
I wrote that down. I did write that. That was one of the notes I took earlier. And I mean, I'd like to explore that a little bit more too, because, I mean, what does that take?
It can take a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
It depends how depleted the account is. I mean, if you're working on fumes here, then you've got to make some deposits. And the thing to remember, is that you might have, if your wife doesn't feel like validating, you might be making deposits for the next 3 months and be the only one doing it before you start to see a response to it. So there's no guarantee that this is going to work quickly. More or less it tends to, but just be aware that it doesn't always work, and you might be making deposits for a while before you start to see something. And that's the other thing that people find frustrating. You may truly be validating, but because that bank account is so low, there's a whole lot of fuck you going on, excuse my French, but until you fill that bank account, it doesn't mean anything yet, right? So there needs to be trust, there needs to be some deposits made in the bank account for that emotional validation to connect more directly. And the more you validate, the more you tend to fill that bank account too, just so you know.
I think another thing to
go ahead.
I was going to say, another thing to consider too is the concept of primary and secondary emotions, right? So I know, based on what you've told me in the past, is that there's a lot of anger, right? But I guess the question is, what's underlying that anger? Anger is typically not. There's often something underlying that, and I wonder if you have spent time really exploring what that might be.
Yeah.
I mean, she's listening. She's sitting there looking at me. She's mean mugging me. But yeah, would you agree?
I agree with
that there's something underlying the anger?
Absolutely. You've never allowed me to have my emotions. You always tell me how they're wrong, and you don't accept them because I'm not reacting the way that you want me to.
You heard that?
Yes, we did.
There you go. So there it is.
Stop fixing the problem, man. So the other thing to keep in mind, so this course that I teach, where Jason and I met, it's a 12-week course. The first 6 weeks are spent on understanding what we bring to the game before we even start the 3-week talk on the validation. So I think there's an opportunity for you to hear. So when things start happening and you have a conversation with your wife and you notice, boom, I'm mad. Like, what's behind that anger, right? There's something that it's telling you something. And it might be that anger is the go-to, But the people that are really expert at this, have said in some training that I've seen that, if they could, he's 55 years old. He said, if I could look back over my 50 years on this planet, I would start with an emotion other than anger when that's what I led with. So that's where, if you can just say the word curious in your mind whenever something starts to happen, just be curious, be curious, be curious. Just get it in there. It'll change. Like suddenly you'll say, hey, wow, you look really mad. You're really frustrated with me. What's going on? That just thought about curiosity can flip the switch in an instant. It's really powerful.
Yeah, and I'll say one other thing, Hab, and I think too, something that's worth exploring is that when we react to something in a way where we tend to get upset, we need to be curious with ourselves and look at, there's probably an underlying value there that's really important to us. I'll give you an example with me and my wife. So say my wife gets pissed at me about something or criticizes me about something, and I get defensive about it, let's say. And, and sometimes it happens right away. But as I reflect on it, it's like, why do I get defensive about that? Well, why I get defensive about it, because feeling connected with her is super important to me, right? So if I search for the underlying value, I know that when I don't feel connected to my wife, I don't feel good. So I really value connection. So as I think about that, I can become more conscious about throughout the day, making more choices that bring me closer in alignment to the value of being connected with her. So for example, that initial reaction, that heightened emotional response is often an indicator that there's something underlying that you value deeply that's not being met. So that's something to think about too.
Gotcha.
Great question, man. Anybody else have any questions for us?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. How do you know when you're doing it right? Or if you're not doing it right?
Good question. Ed, you want to take that?
Well, I mean, generally, they'll tell you. So if you're trying to connect to an emotion and you say, wow, you're really pissed off with me. Often they'll say, well, I'm not pissed off with you. I'm disappointed, so, or they'll say, no, that's not it. And you can say, okay, well, help me here. Tell me what it is. So you can, with validation, it's okay to go in and say, I really don't know what's happening right now, and I need you to help me. So can you tell me more? It gets back to that sort of thing. So generally, if you see things continuing to escalate, you're probably missing the mark. If you see that things kind of level off and you can just feel that the mood is changing a little bit, or that they're telling you you're missing the mark, then you can take it to a new direction. But staying curious is such an important key here.
And then, I mean, so if you get a sense that things are de-escalating, can you just be like, oh, okay, fine, we're good, and then walk away? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah.
So I was going to say, so at the beginning, I talked about, dynamic effectiveness, right? In the sense that what being effective means is different in every situation. So it may just be that somebody needs to have their emotions validated and they calm down. It may be that they are freaking furious with you about some shit you did, and just validating their emotions doesn't change the fact that you still did something that drives them crazy. You know what I mean? And so that you may need to move into a conversation about that specific thing that caused it in the first place. So, it really depends, I guess, is the vague wishy-washy answer. But I think being attuned to the energy in the room and the how you're feeling with the connection between you, and being fully present, I'm telling you, is a really good sort of three-pillared approach to getting a good sense and having some awareness about whether you've whether what you've done feels like it's enough, or whether there might be something else to explore there. And I also think just asking, hey, how are you feeling about this right now? Since we've talked, and she might say, well, you can say all the shit you want. If you still leave the toilet seat up, validate all you want. Just don't put the toilet seat up, for example, so it kind of depends. But I think that with practice and with the connection that you form through validation, you'll become more aware of when it feels like you've, done when you've kind of accomplished what needs to be accomplished.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Hey, Jason. Sorry, go ahead, Fahad.
I was just saying thanks. That's all.
Okay, cool, man.
Okay. Yes, and I just want to make one more point too. So, sometimes when we're using validation, it can be a really heated moment. And sometimes the most validating thing you can do, or the most mindful thing you can do, is say, hey, it looks like we're both really angry right now. Can we just step back for 15 minutes and then come back and try this conversation again? Taking a break is hugely mindful and hugely effective and hugely validating. So don't be afraid to say, let's step away and then come back in 15 minutes or a half hour or tomorrow or whatever. That's really effective too.
That's really useful, actually.
Yeah, because when you're in a state of emotional arousal, it's not easy, man. You tend not to make good choices and say the things that make you effective. So that's great advice, Ed. Does anybody else have anything? These are great questions, guys.
I just had one. So what if the person you're trying to validate doesn't think that you can connect with the emotion that they're having?
So, like, can you give an example of that?
Like if you validate them and they don't believe that you understand, you can say, oh, I really understand you. I know how that must feel, but they don't think that you really know how that can feel.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So, I mean, I would ask, oh, you don't know how to, like, if so, I mean, I guess I would say, so somebody, let's say they are upset about, like, feeling upset about something. And you say, oh man, I can see that you're totally upset. And they say, you have no idea how I'm feeling, basically. Is that what I would ask? God, maybe I don't. I'm totally open to the fact that I might have no idea how you're feeling. But I would love to know, because I care about you. And I feel like if we could talk about it, it would help me learn more about you. And it would bring us closer together, because I am fully committed. Even if I haven't appeared to be in the past, I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to get better. And if you would be open to, sharing your experience with me more deeply, it would help me learn and love you better. I mean, that's what I would say. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that, Ed.
Jason, I feel that you love me more than ever before after that statement. Thank you for validating that.
So this is where you correct the emotion. No, you're totally wrong.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, Rob, I would say too, take a look at that bank account. Like maybe you guys need to top up each other's bank account for a little bit too, so that when you say, hey, I really want to connect, she feels it. And it may not be the case, but it's probably something to take a look at. Yeah, as long as you're being sincere. I mean, that's the thing. Everyone has their radar on. So if you're giving validating statements, and I'll put that in air quotes, the tell me more, and you're not really putting emotion into it yourself. You're not really being, honest about trying to connect and being, showing empathy. They'll know that too. And I'm not saying that's what's happening with you, but just be aware that, when you validate, how you validate matters too. The emotion you put behind it, the connectedness that you're trying to create, that matters. If you're just doing it to appease them so they'll shut up and move on, they'll pick it up, and then that's invalidating, and then you're another debit is made from the emotional bank account.
That's like chum in the water to a shark.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, speaking from deep personal experience here. Anybody else have any questions, guys? This is your chance. We love them. This is great stuff. And by asking a question, you are helping every man and person, actually every human being on this call.
Yeah. I just want to say thank you for everyone, that has put questions forth. I mean, it's really vulnerable to ask questions about this stuff. So kudos to you for sticking your neck out and taking a risk, and, and being out there. It's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's crazy is how easy it is to do for your kids.
Yeah,
at least to me.
that's so easy. I do.
See, you just got validated, Hav.
I know. How he's doing it already.
There you go.
It's so easy, man.
It's so easy, man.
Hey, Tim, did you have a question? I saw you unmuted yourself, I think. Hey, Tim, what? Did you have a question?
I had a question. How about for maybe younger kids, people that aren't quite as vocal? What are some tips that you might throw out for those type of situations when you're trying to validate someone?
So like when you're talking about a kid, like what kind of age
maybe
are you talking?
3 or 4 year olds, or someone who may not have the words to be able to say that they're angry or they're mad or have contempt or.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I don't really know how to answer that. Ed, do you have any ideas?
Well, I mean, obviously you have a simpler conversation, but kids typically can tell you they're scared or they're mad. I mean, unless your kids are not even at the age where they're that vocal. I'm not sure the context, Tim. Like maybe you can give us an example of where you tried to validate and you just felt that the conversation couldn't be had. That might be useful.
Sure. Well, I'm just thinking of the classic grocery store example. You're pushing your 3-year-old in the cart and they want cookies or whatever, and then they have the big meltdown when you say no. They don't necessarily. I guess I'm trying to figure out how you could validate them in that situation.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like with a 3-year-old, like the way I would have handled that is, is like we're leaving. So I'm not sure how much like you can validate somebody, but you could validate a kid who was older for sure, who had like I say, a 6 or 7-year-old. Absolutely, you could, while still dragging them out of the store by their neck. Like,
yeah, I agree. I think that example of the 3-year-old, that's where you're actually teaching them about boundaries. And so, that's kind of separate from validation. But to the 6 or 7-year-old, you can say, "Hey, I understand you're really upset, and you still can't have the cookie. Like we're leaving the store." So, but you have to be able to have some level of communication with them to understand some of the basic concepts, I would say.
Okay. And I think another thing I would say too is that one of the best ways that you can start to instill this as a practice and a value in your family is by modeling it every chance you get. Right. So a 3-year-old might not have the words or the cognitive ability to understand it, but they're watching. They're always watching, and it starts at a very young age. So live it every chance you get, and that's probably. It doesn't mean your 3-year-old's not going to lose it from time to time. They all do, obviously, but I think it's more like at that age it's more really setting the table for what's about to come, right? So that's my take on it, anyways.
I think we covered that a little bit last month in the big group in the alliance, and I think at the age of 3 and 4, it's more or less understanding that when they're throwing fits at that age, they really they can't voice their feelings as well, so they kind of wig out, and I think what's important there is not wigging out with them and making the situation worse. It's more about de-escalating than trying to validate,
Yeah, good point.
Sure. I just have to say I work in customer service. We have a lot of people that come in and voice their complaints, and this technique has been amazing. Just to build connection with them. I've learned so many interesting things from people who've come in as angry as can be, and just validating them has de-escalated it so much that by the end of the conversation, I'm hearing about their grandkids. It's just amazing.
Absolutely, that's a perfect scenario in which to use validation, man. I love it because I agree, it is huge because a lot of times people are pretty upset when they're calling customer service. So yeah, great example, Tim. Thanks for that. All right, guys, anybody else have any questions, comments, concerns, confusion? Take the chance.
I'm just thinking about the reverse as you kind of start to master this skill and get more aware of this with communicating with other people to, say, de-escalate a situation. When you're speaking yourself and you're passionate about something and you feel that the person's not being receptive of what you're saying, how do you kind of handle a situation like that?
Well, I think so. What I would say to that is if you approach the world from the perspective that you can only change you, I think that what you should do is validate your own emotions, right? So it's like, you know what? I'm really happy this person's or whatever. I'm trying to, very passionate about this, and they're not reciprocating my passion. And how is that causing me to feel? Like, is it making me upset? Like, am I mad? Am I feeling disconnected? Like, why am I feeling that way? And then compassionately inquiring about why it is you are feeling the way you are feeling, right? Because again, there might be an underlying value there that's really important to you. But being able to do that in the moment is quite challenging. But I mean, I've been able to do that fairly recently, not all the time, but like fairly recently. So I think removing the judgment from your own emotions, understanding that whatever you feel as a result of what that person does is completely legitimate feeling and is a source of information, and that you can't change them. You can't make somebody care about what you're saying to them as much as you might like to, right? So, and maybe it's an opportunity for you to, ask some questions, from an objective place about, why that was, why, maybe if you validate your own emotions, calm down. I mean, maybe there's an opportunity to have a conversation with the person about what you're feeling and why you're feeling that way, and about asking them why they reacted the way they did. But if you do it from a place of like emotional arousal, let's say when you're pissed, there will be no good outcome. So I would say validate your own emotions first, and that starts by compassionately inquiring about what the emotions you're feeling, and that even before that is removing the judgment from them and recognizing that every emotion is part of the human experience. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good. Thanks.
Cool. I got a chat here. Let's see. Is recording this session going to be available for download? Yes, sir, it is. One thing I was thinking about doing actually was taking the audio of this podcast at a later date and maybe releasing it as a podcast episode. So if anybody has any objection to that, just let me know and I won't do it. But it's pretty anonymous, right? Not gonna be any video or anything like that. So anyways, if anybody has any problems with that, let me know. I'll be doing that. I was thinking about doing that at a later date because I think it would help a lot of people. Anybody else have any questions? Take the chance, guys. 3, 2, 1. All right, we're done. Cool. So listen, guys, I wanted to say, so let's just recover, recap what you've learned. You've learned some really foundational concepts around, sort of what's required about emotional validation. You've taken a new look, I think, at human emotion. We've talked about emotional validation, and we've seen some examples, some real life examples of validation in action, and answered some questions, some of your amazing questions. And I think most of the guys in this group are in the Dad Edge Alliance, but I wanted to just say that if you want to take this stuff to the next level, I mean, you can talk to some of the guys on this call that are in mastermind groups or that are in the Dad Edge Alliance. We talk about this stuff all the time, so whether it's this group or another group, get around a bunch of people that care about this stuff, bounce ideas off them, talk about what's working and what's not working and how to do more of what's working, and learn from other people's experience, because this is challenging. It's a skill that takes a long time to master, and getting around a group of like-minded people where it's safe and it's, you can be vulnerable is a critical component to continuing to move yourself forward and create the connection and create the type of relationships you want. So with that, I want to say thank you. And I want to say that thank you for coming on. My favorite my favorite African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And we came together tonight, and we gave ourselves a set of tools that will help us go far. And as we do that, we will do it together. So Ed, did you want to say any final closing words before we let these wonderful people get on with their evening?
No, just thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this journey tonight. Really appreciate it. And you guys are all awesome, every one of you.
Awesome, cool. Guys. Okay, we have one last chat here. I'm just going to check out real quick to make sure we don't miss anybody. Or maybe I'm not. My mouse is not working. All right, I can't see the chat. So if anybody had a question there, you want to chime in before I drop off, do so right now. All right, that's it. There's just some thank yous. Okay, guys. Well, listen. Have a great night. Thank you for attending so much, and I will upload this. And if anybody wants the video, anyone who wants the URL, I'll just make a private video on YouTube that nobody can search or anything, and I'll send you the link to it. And then so just send me a private message on Facebook, and I will send you the link. And thank you very much, and have a great night, guys. Take care.
Cheers.
All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that masterclass and enjoyed the dialogue. And thank you to everybody who joined the call, who participated to the fundraiser and asked those amazing questions. And thank you especially to Ed Van Hooydonk, who was my partner in crime, my trainer, and the person that introduced me to this concept, and also a great co-host and a great friend on top of all that. So guys, listen, I want to say it again. I said it at the beginning. If you enjoyed that and would love to donate, The link is in the show notes or on the Facebook page. And there's like no, I don't care, $1, $2, whatever, man. Like whatever feels good to you, but it would really help out. And if it's for a good cause, and it would give me some extra motivation to ride this insane distance over the weekend on my unicycle. So, but if you don't feel like it, hey, man, I hope you enjoyed it anyways. And please, please apply these skills. Try again, and know that it's not always going to go right. But that's how we learn. And that's what this podcast is all about. And again, once again, thank you for listening. It means the world to me. I love you guys.